Of course you guys know I like PC gaming, but what you might not know is that I also happen to really like ice cream. That is why I'm currently making ice cream. However, I'm tired of having to game and make my ice cream separately. So that's when I had the idea that I could maybe make some kind of device so that I could actually make ice cream while I game, use my computer to make ice cream. Because why should I have to do them separately when I could just do them together by using the electricity from the PC to make ice cream? So in this video, I want to solve my problem. I want to build some sort of device that can make ice cream, but it can also be connected to my computer's power supply, so I can literally make ice cream while I game with the same machine. Here's a rough model of the contraption I want to build. So I'm going to build a wooden base down here, and that wooden base will store a motor that will spin around so the ice cream will be made. And wires from the bottom of the base will connect to my gaming PC. Here's a rough version of the parts that I estimate so far I will need for the project, plus likely some additional ones as we go along. These are just the dimensions of each side of the base that I will build later on in the video. I have here in front of me several of the parts that I will be using in the gaming PC build for the PC that will power the ice cream maker. I don't want to use my main gaming PC to power the ice cream maker because while I'm doing some tests, I think that using electricity from the power supply in this way might cause some parts to be damaged if something goes wrong. And I'd much rather risk cheaper components while that process is happening. However, I did make sure to get a fully modular power supply because in order to make this project work, what I'll likely have to do is actually solder the connectors from the power supply to some wires that I'll have hooked up to the motor. And I don't want to solder to cables that are stuck to the power supply permanently because then I'll just have wires hanging off in the end. So that's why I'll just solder it to a connector like this, and then I can just remove the connector later if I need to for any reason. The next step in the process is to get some parts so I can start working, mainly some lumber to build the base, a saw to cut it, and also a motor that I'll put in the base to power the ice cream maker. So I'm off to get those parts now. So it's the next day now, and I've gotten a lot of the materials that I'll be using for this project. Before I get into the PC build part of the project, I just want to give you guys a better idea of what this machine is going to look like by building the base. So the materials that I've purchased so far are this wood to build the box, a saw to cut it, and also these ball bearings, which are just like a ball that spins around like that. So in order for the ice cream to be made, this bowl is going to have to spin around. The step for building the base involves cutting this wood into different pieces and then building a box. And on top of the box, I'm going to nail down 4 of these ball bearings so that this bowl is going to roll on top of the 4 ball bearings. And then a motor right in the center of the top plank is going to spin while the ball bearings hold up the weight of the bowl. Now let's get right into building the base so you guys can see what it'll look like. Well guys, now as you can see, the building of the base is pretty much complete. While the craftsmanship might leave a little bit to be desired, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out because this is the first time I've done something like this. And what's important is that it does fulfill the purpose of allowing the bowl to spin freely on top of this box. Of course, once the motor is installed, then the motor will be in the center of this top plank coming in from below, and then it's going to be spinning around on a fixed axis after that so the ice cream can be made. So the next step really is to find a suitable motor, and that's what I'm going to go do right now. Alright, so now I think I found a motor that is suitable for providing the rotational force necessary to make the ice cream. But before we get into that part of the project, I want to briefly turn your attention to the PC that will actually be making the ice cream. This is Logan's Tech Lab after all. Can't hurt to have a good old PC build. So I want to go through all the components that I'll be using for this PC build. Firstly, we have the motherboard here. This is not actually the correct motherboard. I used a different box, but the motherboard is also a B450 board with an AM4 socket, micro ATX, and the CPU is already pre-installed since both of these parts are used, and the CPU is a Ryzen 7 2700X. Moving on. For the graphics card, we have this absolutely terrible GT210. You thought the GT710 was bad, but that's because there's no reason to risk an expensive graphics card just for testing purposes at first here. So that's why I'm using this card. Again, similar principle for why we only have one 4 gig stick of DDR4. Then we have this small cooler that I got off of an old Athlon CPU. The cooling performance is surprisingly good given the size of this tiny little heatsink. The case is a Corsair 110R that I got a few years ago. Then I also have this SSD. Just kidding, it actually says A55, but it really looks like it says. And then perhaps the star of this build is this 650 watt power supply because it's fully modular, which is perfect for our needs, and you will see why that is very shortly. Now that I've gone through the parts list, it's time to build this PC. As you guys can see, the PC build is now complete. We are currently in the BIOS. Now, before I go ahead and install Windows 10, I just wanted to talk about this anomaly, which you guys might have some questions about. In case you're wondering what the heck this thing is, I just wanted to explain that these are the wires that are attached to the power supply, but on this end, as you can see, I cut them open, separated out the wires because these are the wires that are going to connect on the other end to the motor that will be used to spin around so that the ice cream can be made. More on that coming up. So I have some good news, guys. I managed to connect some wires to the power supply cable in such a way that I can use these wires now in order to power this motor. This is just a small motor that I got on Amazon, by the way. And I took the power supply out of the PC build that I just put it in, just because it's easier to tinker with that way. Here are the wires that are important. There's a ground wire and a 12 volt wire. This being ground, this is 12 volt. I just extended them to make it easier to make a connection with the motor. And to power the motor, we just have to connect the 12 volt to one side and connect the ground to the other side. And which side I connect each of them to does not matter, because if I connect it the other way, then it'll just spin in the opposite direction. So now I just want to show you guys the motor in action. So we're going to connect one side to one end, connect the other side of the motor to this end, and then watch what happens when I turn on the power supply. I'm not sure how well you can see that, but the motor's now spinning. And this is a very important step in enabling my computer to actually be able to make the ice cream. Let me just give you guys a rundown of how things are going so far with the project. So I obviously got the motor to work, and this motor is the correct RPM, around 40 RPM that we need to make ice cream, but I'm not sure that it has enough torque to turn this bowl once the ice cream ingredients are inside. Unfortunately, there's absolutely no way for me to know if this motor has a sufficient torque until I have more of the machine built. So the obvious choice is to just assume that it has enough torque, because it probably should. The engineers on Reddit think so anyway. As immediate next steps we have, well, first of all, I'm gonna find a way to drill some holes and then add some screws to be able to secure this motor to the center of this top of the base where the bowl is currently resting, since the motor is going to come through the bottom and spin around the bowl. And if you're wondering how this is going to spin around something that looks like this on the bottom, and the answer to that is really the other part that I'm going to be working on in the immediate future. 3D printing a part that will be able to interlock into the bottom of this bowl and also to be secured to the top of the motor. So hopefully that goes well. I'm happy to report that the installation of the motor went surprisingly well. Now, really, there's only one major step left, and that is to design and get 3D printed the part that will connect to this piece which is attached to the motor, and that will on the other side connect to the bottom of the bowl. I'm currently in the process of designing that part. But in the process, what I did is I ordered a prototype of this piece that I designed here, just to make sure that it interlocks properly with the bottom of the bowl. Now that I know it does, what I'm gonna do is basically build on the model of this part to make it taller and also add screw holes so that it could attach to that black metal piece on the motor. Now, once that's attached, the bowl will be able to be spun around while it's on top of the ball bearings, and there will only be one tiny little thing left to do, and then the PC should be ready to make ice cream. Well, it's a few days later now, and I have finally gotten in the mail this essential part for the project. I'm also extremely sleep deprived right now, so if I seem a little sluggish today, that's probably why. Now, I don't want to show you the box that this part came in because there's labels on it, and why give them free advertising? And more importantly, actually, I do not support the company that sold me this part, because this shipment took way longer than it was supposed to. It kept on getting delayed. It was supposed to arrive several days ago now. They definitely do not have my support in the future. Now, this part may be exquisite, but I'm not sure I designed it correctly. So what we're gonna have to do is go ahead and see if this works. So I'm gonna install it and we're gonna test it. What I don't know is whether or not the motor will be powerful enough to turn around the bowl. So let's install this part and find out. Okay guys, this is the moment of truth. I don't know if this bowl will be able to be spinned around by the motor, as things are currently. So it's super important that this rolls smoothly in order for it to work. I'm gonna add some oil, just last thing to the ball bearings. All right, moment of truth. Will the bowl spin or not when I flick this switch on the power supply? Yes! It appears to be working perfectly. You have no idea how glad I am about that, because I've been spending the last few weeks working on this and it finally works. I'm really happy about that. So now there's really only one real step left, and that is to basically find a way to secure this part of the contraption to the top of the wood here so that it can sit like this and hold this thing in place while the bowl spins, since that's how the ice cream will be made. So I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to do that, but I think I'm going to end up 3D printing some parts most likely, and I'm going to start going to design those parts now. So over the past few days, I've designed the 3D model for these parts, and then I've ordered the parts and I actually received them just today. Now, what exactly is the purpose of these parts, I hear you ask? Well, while the bowl spins around up here, there needs to be something that's actually mixing the ice cream, and that's where these parts come in. This red piece inside is actually going to be mixing around the ice cream, but this shroud, which holds the red thing, is going to need to be held in place in one way or another. So that's where these parts come in, because there's 3 places on here where these, with that notch, they perfectly interlock into 3 different places on here, equidistant from each other. So what I must do now is drill some holes for these to go into on here, and then actually screw the 3 of these on equidistant in different places on this base. If all goes as planned, this should be the last step of actual building before I can take this crude contraption, hook it up to my gaming PC, and make some ice cream while gaming. So I'm going to go ahead and attach these parts to the base now. Now everything's set up. The PC's hooked up to this crude ice cream making contraption. So we are now ready to make ice cream with my PC for the very first time. Now you will notice that when I press the power button on the PC, not only will the PC turn on, but the motor on this ice cream making device will turn on as well, like so. See? The motor doesn't actually turn on until I press the power button on the PC because the PC power supply doesn't start delivering power until it's told to when I press the power button on here. And then that's when the motor turns on as well. Now I'm going to go ahead and install these parts onto the contraption as well. The reason I didn't add them before is because this bowl actually needs to be frozen overnight, so the inside of it now has ice inside. Actually, for these 3D printed parts, I got the tolerance a bit wrong, so they don't actually fit perfectly, but it's okay because I managed to squeeze it in even though I got one of the measurements wrong, so the space was smaller, but it does barely just snap into place, so we're all good. Now I will turn on the PC and we're gonna make some ice cream while gaming. In order to make the ice cream, I need to add this ice cream mixture to the bowl. So we'll just go ahead and do that while the PC is turning on. All good. Now, as you can see, I'm playing Mafia Definitive Edition while I'm also making ice cream at the same time. That's what I call killing two birds with one stone. Side note, I changed the graphics card in this machine to a GT 1030 just so that it would be able to even run this game. Ice cream will take about 20 minutes to make, and I'll be gaming the entire time because I might as well. Why have a separate machine for making ice cream when I could just do that with my PC while I game, right? The ice cream's ready now. Let's see how it is. That is some delicious PC-made ice cream. Now I'll enjoy this ice cream knowing that I made it in the best way possible. And that anytime I want to play games, I can make ice cream with my PC while I do so. You all have a good one.